Welcome to the Lean Manufacturer. Today, Chris Wolf speaks with Katie McGinty, Vice President and Chief Sustainability, Government, and Regulatory Affairs Officer at Johnson Controls. Get ready to hear how Johnson Controls is tackling climate change building by building.
It's a tremendous pleasure today. I'm joined by Katie McGinty, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Johnson Controls, or JCI. Katie, congratulations. I understand this is your 5th anniversary with the firm.
Feels like 5 minutes. Yes, not just a job, it's an adventure.
What's been your most proud moment, do you think, over those 5 years?
Well, it really is a privilege and a pleasure every day. I feel very fortunate to be working with just terrific people who are on a mission to invent, to create, and then to deliver outcomes that are, helping our partners bolster their bottom line, but achieving bigger things as well. So being part of that solution set, for example, in terms of climate change, in terms of clean and healthy buildings. So that's something that inspires me every day to get out of bed, make a difference, and to be able to do that with some really terrific colleagues.
Katie, Johnson Controls is one of the most trusted names in the United States, certainly around the world, and when it comes to building technologies. It's a 130-year young organization. Tell us about today's Johnson Controls.
Well, first of all, I love that. And we do think of ourselves as young, innovative, and working every day to be on the cutting edge. For us, it's about a double shot of innovation. It's technology, as well as innovating around our business model. On that side, to be a real partner, not just selling, but joining our customers in their journey. And on the technology side, it's about a full suite of operating in HVAC, fire, security, but also a digital platform now that we call Open Blue that is unleashing incredible productive promise in every kind of building type out there, from residential to the biggest factory. So we're just getting started at 130 plus years old.
So beyond just technical innovation, it's real commercial innovation, key to the business.
It is, and in extraordinary and new ways. So for quite some time, Johnson Controls has been on the cutting edge of something that has been referred to as performance contracting. That lives in a space that says, look, when we come in and upgrade that operating equipment, it generates appreciable operating cost savings. We can leverage those cost savings to reduce or to avoid the upfront capital costs for our partners, period. But we've evolved well beyond that to guaranteeing a variety of different outcomes, not just energy and cost savings. I'll give you an example. It's even gone to the lengths with a hospital in Singapore, for example. We said that our sensors, our digital platform, can help that hospital reduce the time from a code blue to the time when the patient's on the operating table. And we have succeeded in reducing that time from 7 minutes to 2 minutes with a huge upside in terms of lives saved. And the reason that works is because our sensors are aware the moment that there is an issue, and then immediately prepare the operating theater in terms of the temperature, the humidity conditions that enable an operation to happen. So the creativity, the lengths to which we now can work with our partners to achieve and guarantee their outcomes are just extraordinary.
Now, Katie, personally, I know that you graduated with a degree in chemistry. You went on to get your JD, so you're a trained lawyer. You spent time in the White House in the Clinton administration as the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. How in the world did a person like you end up talking about medical outcomes driven through building systems and automation?
Well, I'll tell you, some of this has not been a paternal plan. but it has certainly been a privilege and a lot of fun. So I'm ninth of 10 kids, and most of my brothers and sisters went right from high school into the workforce. So when I started to say, well, geez, I want to go to college, my father, you bet, said, you better do something practical. And so I wrapped my arms around chemistry, and it led to a fascination with technology. And one of the things I found when I had the opportunity then to work in the White House or as Secretary of Environmental Protection in my home state of Pennsylvania is that when you bring technology into public policy, it can really change those issues that have been divisive, that create kind of a World War III, into real opportunity. And that's some of how I first met Johnson Controls. I was driving an agenda both in the White House and in Pennsylvania. So that, for example, was aimed at optimizing around energy, bringing clean energy systems in. And, look, there's upfront cost to that. But to have a Johnson Controls come to the table and to say, look, we can make a business out of that. We can provide financing, again, out of those savings and help us, to drive both economic opportunity, job creation, while we're becoming lean and mean with respect to energy resources. So it's been a long time partnership and ride with Johnson Controls, and now I'm thrilled to be fully part of the team.
Well, I know that we're speaking to you from New York today. I imagine you may be there as a representative of JCI at the Financial Times U.S. Decarbonization and Industrial Transition Summit, that's a mouthful, talking about the massive expansion of clean power that's happening in the U.S. How's JCI participating in that effort?
Well, I'll give you some very specific examples. So for our own facilities and with our partners who are in the manufacturing space, similar to the great work that you all do to enable our manufacturing partners to compete and win and succeed. So as we looked at our own facilities in our decarbonization journey, we've made great progress in cutting our carbon emissions almost 45% from our baseline year and against our 55% reduction commitment that we hope to achieve in 2030. Taking those next steps, we started to look at what are our biggest energy consuming facilities. And we looked at one of our major must-run manufacturing plants in Oklahoma. And what we found there is probably pretty typical of what you would see in many such facilities, and that is because it's must-run, because it's got backlog, because we've got to run that facility as hard as we can, there was some postponed maintenance, let's say, in that facility. Well, how do we go about then upgrading? How do we go about achieving the emission reductions that we needed to put to work there? So we put to work then our suite of technologies, both total upgrade on the chiller systems, the operating systems, as well as putting our digital platform to work. And the happy upshot of that is not only a 43% reduction in the carbon and in the energy consumption and emissions from that plant, but also a savings of almost $1 million a year, $960,000 a year in operating cost savings. So it's unleashing, the reality and the idea that if you're smart about cutting carbon, you're cutting costs as well. One other example, we have a major plant in Frome in France. There, it was about putting our OpenBlue digital platform to work with meters, with sensors through the plant. Almost from the time we flipped the switch on that digital platform, we found the opportunity to cut our energy costs by 30%. That's a big deal. At a time when, again, we're all very capital cost conscious and wanting to put every dollar into throughput, not into utility bills that we don't need.
Well, it sounds as though you're turbocharging common sense with data and technology. I know we would find Johnson Controls equipment in all kinds of must-run facilities. That's airports, it's stadiums, it's office buildings, it's factories. I imagine you're taking the learnings that you have at home and bringing those to your partners on the customer side.
We are. And one of the things that it leads to is a real transformation of what the outcomes are that can be achieved. Going from just solving a problem, and let's say that problem is, again, you want to achieve emission reductions, to supercharging the strategy and the purpose of the organization. We mentioned hospitals before. I'll give another hospital example. It's very nice when we can go to the C-suite of a hospital and say, look, we can cut your energy bills tomorrow 30%. Terrific. Who doesn't want that? But when we can also say the very same temperature and humidity sensors we will use and put to work to optimize the HVAC, detect and destroy viruses in that hospital room, now you're talking about the strategic purpose of the hospital itself. Or maybe a little more fun example, as we work with stadiums. So again, it's terrific when our occupancy sensors can drive down the HVAC needs and HVAC costs in parts of the stadium that aren't occupied. Much more fun to the organizational purpose of a stadium to delight the fans when we can also then send a message right to Katie McGinty in the stands and say, time for a cold beer. There's no line over at gate 13. So we've optimized the HVAC there and we've delighted the fans. It's a different conversation, and it takes the work we do, from the basement where the HVAC is and right up to the boardroom.
So tell me about a day in the life of Katie McGinty. You're number 9 of 10 kids. You love to have a cold beer. You love to have fun, but you're really on a mission to try and connect Johnson Controls capabilities with the hearts and minds of the C-suite. How do you go about that day to day?
Well, it has been a mission of mine, I think, for a long time, to find the ways to break through the old trade-off that if something is good for the environment, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for the bottom line. And make no mistake, if we're not smart about our policies, if we're not smart about our approaches, for sure, then it is painful to that bottom line. But with technology today, we have the opportunity to drive against multiple outcomes so that, yes, you are making a facility much more efficient. You're doing your piece, to help tackle climate change. But when you are also enabling that facility to outcompete competitors, because why? Because you've upgraded the equipment. You have ensured and guaranteed the runtime of that equipment. When you have bolstered your own team in that facility with the smarts and the actionable intelligence that comes from a digital platform, for example, you're not just doing good and doing things that feel good. You're competing and winning every day. That's what gives me joy.
Now, talk to me. You've spent a lot of time in Washington. That's where your home is. Is there a tension right now between what's good for the public sector, what's good for the private sector? How are you finding the politics happening in Washington, enabling or maybe slowing down the mission that you're on?
Yeah, I think that overall, people have decided it's more advantageous to them to accentuate where there is difference and where there's division. And it's an injustice, I think, to what our country is supposed to be about. Compromise is not a dirty word. It's the brilliance on which our whole Constitution was founded, the idea that we can come together as diverse people with diverse interests and find the common ground. And, I wish more in Washington would give that a try, because what they would find is that when you do bring that diversity of experience and insight to bear, that every problem becomes an opportunity, and you unleash incredible creativity. So there's not enough of that, on display in DC these days, but I think we have seen at least some whites of the eyes of that in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, for example. Great move forward for the country. Also, when we take manufacturing back in this country, such a critical priority, it's good to see that in something like the CHIPS Act to get us back in that game. In fact, you mentioned some of my early start as a chemist, etc. But what set me on fire about public policy was I was coming up just at the time that our scientists in the U.S. invented semiconductors, but then we lost on the commercialization and owning that market because we decided we didn't want to make things in this country anymore. So I'm glad to see that despite the divisions, et cetera, there are some things that are bringing us together and we're making progress with some smart initiatives and policy.
Well, I know you're also making a difference through the charitable foundation that Johnson Controls runs. You're newly the president of that foundation, and you're investing in reactivating the labor skill set available to us in the United States. Maybe talk a little bit about that good work that you're doing there.
Well, we've taken a fresh look at our strategy with respect to that foundation. Sure, we can write a check, and sure, that will help worthy organizations. But it seemed to us that it leaves a whole lot on the table. What else can we bring besides what, against the needs out there, will always be modest, just from a dollars and cents point of view? And we know that we can bring know-how. We can bring expertise. We can bring some of our equipment and our technology. So we've shifted from a wide and shallow to a narrow and deep. And we have new partnerships, for example, with Habitat for Humanity. A perfect example where, our teams can, get over there with their tool belt, get to work. We donate our equipment, as well as then we train many of the people who are going to be benefited from that new housing. And we're pleased to say that as we have those energy efficiency engineers, or as we bring that new talent to bear, we're getting that talent now as new recruits to Johnson Controls. So it's a 1 + 1 = 11 strategy.
More than a circular economy. Really fantastic. We've spoken about the U.S., but you're a global citizen. You cited that hospital example in Singapore. What are you seeing happening in Europe and in Asia, lessons maybe we should be thinking about here in the States?
Well, look, I think the race is on, right? In terms of leadership in technology and innovation, and putting that technology to work to drive our respective economies and the global economy. And I do think that as we decide that we want to run towards and embrace challenges, we can convert them into opportunities. And I'll give you an example. Spent a lot of time with leaders in the AI space, leaders in the data center space. Now, some countries are moving very quickly to say, look, we're going to need a whole lot more compute. And that means we're going to have to get a whole lot more efficient so that we have capacity on the grid to support that compute. That is a great market signal, because what it does is it leads to innovation that will enable us to accelerate the build out of those data centers. And to be very specific about it, when we see those signals, we've been able to put our engineers to work. We've redesigned the HVAC systems that we otherwise use to be purpose-built for data centers. And when we did that, we found we could slice the energy need to cool a data center by almost 80%.
Well,
imagine the additional breadth of compute and capacity you can achieve when you need only such a very small fraction of energy to get the job done. That's the kind of thing that motivates us. And I think some countries are sending those signals, and it will stimulate innovation.
So it's interesting to see. I'm sure your shareholders appreciate that Johnson Controls is taking cost out of the carbon cost of AI. That's got to be a massive market opportunity for you with the corporations that you serve.
It's surprising the degree to which when you sit down with the hyperscalers, for example, this issue of needing available and reliable energy sources is becoming a rate determining factor as to how quickly we can build out that needed capacity. So that can either be one of those either or situations. Well, either we have energy or we have data centers. We don't have enough for both. Well, we can't have that kind of one or the other. And I think it is in that innovation that we get moving. Another example of it is, there's concern around the availability and the cost of minerals, metals, materials. One example of where we're helping to tackle that again in the data center space is, we've moved away from, in one of our models, from an oil-based system. That oil-based system, it requires us to have whole build out balance of systems around the HVAC itself. When we switch that to mag bearing, it's a 44% reduction in the materials, the metals, the rare earths, et cetera, that we need to run the machine. So innovation enabling us to have resilience and confidence of continuity of operations against the kind of surprises we've seen, in the last couple of years in supply chains and other key factors.
When we've spoken in the past, you've said one of the joys of your 5 years at Johnson Controls is working for a home team that wants to move and move quickly. You've been able to accelerate, the value that's being released through sustainability and profitability as a result of that. What advice would you give to other organizations who may just be starting on that journey?
Yeah, terrific. I think if there was an outlook to say on ESG, for example, on climate, on sustainability, let's look at that just like we are looking at AI. Let's put a tiger team to it to see what's in this for us. And I think when organizations do that and embrace it as a matter of strategy, the kind of outcomes that they're seeing is, one, putting the kind of technology we're talking about today to work to bolster the by slashing those operating costs. That's a huge business fundamental that gets advanced when you decide to be strategic about something like sustainability. What else does it do? Well, young people want to work for purpose-driven organizations. And so that attract and retain the best talent in a competitive world, you're ahead of the game. I think shareholders want to see long-term asset value being protected. And again, the bottom line being reinforced with lean, mean, effective organizations. Embracing something like sustainability at the C-suite as a strategic opportunity, can unleash and drive those kinds of positive business fundamental outcomes.
Katie, let me ask you a question. There's kind of a good news, bad news connotation of energy and manufacturing. Manufacturing facilities consume a ton of energy, but you see a great opportunity there.
I do. In the big picture, buildings represent almost 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a whole lot of energy. As you said, the good news side of that is that we have the technology today to turn that situation around. It's about efficiency, electrification, and digitalization. On the electrification piece, especially in the manufacturing context, I think we're now achieving operational capabilities in heat pumps, for example, that are driving huge efficiency into manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and every area of our productive processes where you need process heat. With electrification and heat pumps, We can grab the heat that comes off of those production processes, putting it to work in a facility so that you're achieving 5, 6, sometimes 10 times the workable energy for every unit of energy you put in the front end. It both is accelerating of the production process as well as dramatically minimizing production costs.
Amazing multiplier effect that's happening with that technology, particularly the heat pumps that you mentioned.
Indeed. Yeah, I sometimes call them magic machines. Yeah, as a former chemist, living in the world of the law of physics, it almost defies physics when you think of the capability, because you're not combusting to create energy. And with thermal energy that's created, you are putting that back to work for process heat, for space heat, and for heating water. You get multiples, again, of workable energy for the unit of energy you put in the front end. So truly a miracle machine.
Well, as we wrap up here, I just want to thank you. Johnson Controls has been a long time and very valued partner and customer of PTC. Our customers, our listeners, are operating manufacturing facilities around the world. Allow me to let you give a shameless plug for Johnson Controls and your innovation. What should our listeners be thinking about when they initiate a conversation with your salespeople and thought leaders?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is that, look, you're running a great organization. It's a competitive world out there. Take a look at where all of that equipment in the basement, of that building, that facility that you're operating, is maybe costing you where it could be generative, of savings, of opportunity and outcomes. But I think more than that even is understand that in these journeys, it's not just a sales relationship, but it's genuinely a partnership, ensuring that today and over the long haul that you're achieving your outcomes. And I will say, coming back to what we've been able to achieve in our own factories, both those operational outcomes that I mentioned in our Oklahoma facility and our facility in France, part of the backbone of that is what you at PTC have offered us as partners. We've been able to build on that then with our OpenBlue digital platform, and then to put that smarts that you enable us to have to work to redesign and re-engineer our equipment to achieve outcomes for our partners and customers. Technology's there. The future is bright. Get ahead of the curve.
Well, what a great message to leave on. Thank you so much, Katie, for being with us. It's awesome to see how a 130-year young company is really taking the bull by the horns when it comes to sustainability and profitability. Thanks so much for your time with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Lean Manufacturer. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite streaming platform, and please leave a rating or a review. Be sure to check out other episodes to hear new perspectives on improving life for manufacturers in areas like operational efficiency, quality, sustainability, lean strategies, and the connected worker. If you have a topic of interest, a question, or want to provide feedback, email us at theleanmanufacturer@ptc.com or visit us at ptc.com/theleanmanufacturer.